It's said that people in Louisiana don't tolerate corruption, they demand it.
New Orleans was the first American city that the Sicilian Mafia began to inhabit.
And I think anybody who has the connections and the money can have somebody hurt.
Within American Italian mafia families, the individual with the most power, influence, and wealth is known as the boss. Some bosses rule their dynasties from behind the scenes in the shadows, always maintaining a low profile. Others are highly visible, larger-than-life characters with national reputations. Such was a longtime supreme ruler of the Mafia of New Orleans, Carlos Marcello. After centuries of changing owners, the Louisiana purchase by Thomas Jefferson finally placed the city of New Orleans under U.S. control. In the 1800s, it became a thriving city and the most attractive American destination for Italian immigrants.
It's very unique in that it's 90% Sicilian. Out of every 1,900 people are from Sicily. And it was the first group of immigrants in this country, contrary to what a lot of people think. And in 1850, there were more Italians here than in New York. It was a 1-2 punch for about 30 years, and then New York finally overwhelmed us. But for the longest time, New Orleans was the main headquarters for the Italian immigration.
The migration to America by Sicilians was precipitated by the unification of Italy in 1860. This unification plunged Sicily into an economic depression, and the poverty-stricken Sicilians fled to North Africa, northern Italy, and the United States.
It starts back with Garibaldi when he went there in 1860 and captured Sicily, and then the southern part, and turned it over to King Victor Emmanuel to become the initial impact of uniting the nations. Italy became a country for the first time in 1870 since the Roman days. And they were promised, the southern part of Italy was promised all kinds of things. And when those promises weren't fulfilled, well, they were looking for opportunities elsewhere, and the mass immigration started, and they took off.
The migrating Sicilians were drawn to New Orleans because of its temperate weather and the opportunities afforded them there, which were different than what New York had to offer.
In New York, they went there and they started digging tunnels, or they went to work in factories. That was not the case here. Even in New Orleans, they didn't have to live in an 8th story of a tenement building without hot or even water, forget hot water. There was a different life. It was closer to the European life. So when they arrived, they almost fit right in. It was almost like being home. It was a natural transfer.
Another natural transfer to New Orleans, albeit a less desirable one, was a small but notorious segment of the Sicilian population. The secret criminal organization known as the Mafia had been a part of Sicily for years, first established as a reaction to oppressive rulers in Italy. John H. Davis, author of Mafia Kingfish, explains why.
New Orleans was the first American city that the Sicilian Mafia began to inhabit. And long before New York or Chicago or any other. They were attracted to New Orleans and to the state of Louisiana because it resembled somewhat Sicily. And so they came here in droves, and by the turn of the century, we're talking about by 1900, there were about 100 mafiosi in New Orleans.
The permissive attitudes in New Orleans made the city a haven for vice and corruption.
The corruption in the New Orleans area is probably going back 100 years to late 1890s that I would know about. In the past, law enforcement has closed a blind eye to it. I'm not saying the police were corrupt, but things are tolerated in the French Quarter that would not be tolerated anywhere else in the country.
When the Sicilian immigrants arrived in New Orleans, many became laborers on the docks and on plantations. It was in these very areas that the Mafia began to dominate. By the early 1870s, the Mafia had made inroads in controlling the waterfront and markets, and eventually the hauling of freight in the ports. Their means of gaining this control was through their standard way, violence. Between 1869 and 1889, the New Orleans police attributed over 100 murders to the infamous Sicilian Mafia. The tactic of gaining control through violence, which had worked so well in Sicily, became standard procedure in Louisiana as well. The violence in New Orleans' Mafia-controlled docks and markets erupted as rival families fought for dominance. In the ongoing confrontation, the supposedly corrupt chief of police, David Hennessy, was assassinated, presumably by members of the warring families. Enraged citizens, fueled by anti-Italian sentiment, took revenge and lynched several Italian suspects in custody in the local jail. This resulted in protests by outraged Italians, both in the U.S. and Italy. While the local press rejoiced that the city's Mafia had been wiped out, they were wrong. After a couple of years, the gangsters regrouped, and by the early 1920s, one family had firmly established its dominance in New Orleans. It would eventually bear the name of an illiterate Italian immigrant who became one of America's most powerful Mafia bosses. Carlos Marcello's parents emigrated to North Africa, where Carlos was born in 1910. Carlos's father, Joseph Marcello, went on to Louisiana, and when Carlos was 8 months old, he and his mother rejoined Joseph in what would be their new homeland. As their small family expanded, the Marcellos took to farming a plot of land outside New Orleans. When Carlos was old enough, he was given the job of transporting the produce his family grew to the markets in the city. Coming in daily contact with the rough world of the Sicilian-dominated markets, young Marcello got his first exposure to the Mafia. It was then he realized the farming life was not going to be his calling.
Well, Carlos Marcello was an extraordinarily capable and intelligent young man who left his family's farm in the bayous and started committing crimes in the city of New Orleans.
Marcello's early criminal career consisted mostly of small-time theft. A botched bank job eventually landed Carlos behind bars with a 9 to 12-year prison sentence. At the time of his conviction, he was just 20 years old. Through a Mafia connection, Marcello's father was able to gain a pardon for his son from Louisiana's governor, O.K. Allen. Young Carlos learned firsthand the benefits of having friends in high places and the extent to which Mafia influence could reach.
By 1930, there were mafiosi at every level of government in New Orleans.
After his abbreviated prison term, Carlos returned to the city and opened a bar called the Brown Bomber, named after the fighter Joe Louis. Soon he branched out and began distributing jukeboxes and pinball machines in restaurants around Algiers and Gretna. Bar owners who declined doing business with Marcello or his brothers were soon persuaded to change their minds.
So have you thought about our offer?
Yeah, but like I told you, I already have a jukebox.
Not one of ours. You don't have one of our machines. You got a piece of junk.
Look, every bar in the parish is putting in our machines. Sure, you don't want to be the only one left with a piece of junk. Could be bad for business.
Very bad.
I think he was feared. I don't know how realistic that fear was or how realistic his ability to carry it out, but obviously there were many people who thought he could. And I think anybody who has the connections and the money can have somebody hurt if they want that done.
Marcello's reputation reached New York Mafia boss Frank Costello. Under attack by officials up north, Costello was planning to move his slot machines to the New Orleans area.
You're going to start into the Mafia basically after Costello brought down all the slot machines, and he then successfully placed them in all the bars and restaurants. He began getting rich because he was getting a cut, you know, from every slot machine that he installed. He would split it with Costello.
The fact that gambling was illegal in Louisiana didn't deter anyone. Louisiana Senator Huey Long, agreeing to a 10% cut of the take, made sure the police looked the other way. Marcello wielded his power with an iron hand. He allegedly took people to his property on the bayou and had them disposed of.
And he had a bathtub in back of the property, and he'd fill it with lye, and the unfortunate victim would be decomposed in the bathtub full of lye, and then the tub would be poured into the bayou.
Not everyone buys the violent reputation.
As far as I knew, Marcello did not have a reputation for violence. There were allegations years ago that he might have been involved in a gangland style hit on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. That was nothing but rumor. It never went beyond rumor. In my opinion, he never had to resort to that type of strong-arm techniques.
New York boss Frank Costello was so pleased with how Marcello ran the slot machine business in New Orleans that when he opened a Las Vegas-style gambling house in Jefferson Parish, Carlos was counted in as a 12.5% partner. By the time he was 37 years old, Marcello had amassed a small fortune from his illegal dealings. In 1947, he became the boss of the entire New Orleans Mafia. He also became one of the wealthiest men in Louisiana, with dozens of illegal and legitimate enterprises. Although only 5 feet 2 inches tall and nicknamed the Little Man, Marcello became the biggest leader in the New Orleans Mafia and one of Louisiana's wealthiest men. His total worth was estimated at $450 million.
Drugs. That was his big staple. Heroin that would come in from Sicily into the port of New Orleans, and Carlos would distribute it in Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi, Alabama, the whole southern group of states.
Marcello's territory extended from the Mississippi River Delta throughout much of the Gulf states. He became a master at paying off anyone necessary to ensure his operations ran smoothly. He was able to keep his activities relatively free of legal interference until concerned citizens invited a former FBI agent to investigate the New Orleans Police Department. Aaron Cohen began to expose the goings-on in Louisiana, which eventually came to the attention of Robert Kennedy and a Senate committee investigating corruption. Since his rise to the top of the New Orleans Mafia in 1947, Carlos Marcello's wealth and power continued to grow. Although the federal government repeatedly tried to put Marcello out of business, he seemed impossible to convict. For years, he and his Mafia family seemed to be able to operate with virtual impunity. That began to change, however, with the vigorous anti-racketeering and corruption efforts of individuals such as State Police Superintendent Francis Grevenberg and former FBI agent Aaron Cohen. Brought to New Orleans in 1953 to investigate corruption in the police department, Cohen eventually headed up the privately funded Metropolitan Crime Commission. Grevenberg was appointed in 1952 as superintendent of state police, which he says also had a long history of corruption.
Huey Long had them originally. He organized it in 1935, and he used it like his little private army. But they were all politicians, people that the politicians asked him to hire. And that's the way they did it. So I cut that out right away. And I fired a few. I wished I'd fired more, because these guys were so used to taking kickbacks, and I had a terrible time with it.
Now age 85, Grevenberg recalls numerous incidents of police corruption when he was in office.
I raided a place called the Four Leaf Clover Club. I raided it 7 times. And the 4th time I raided it, Because I saw these young girls in there. We booked these prostitutes with the sheriff's office, but they would never try them. The sheriff was half owner of the house of prostitution. We finally put the owner, the man who was half owner of it, with him in jail for 10 years on a mandatory narcotics law that I had passed that liberal judges canceled, annulled 2 years later.
The extent of Carlos Marcello's criminal activities went well beyond the mere control of police. Former federal prosecutor Eads Hogue saw how far that influence went.
He controlled the traditional rackets along the southern Gulf Coast, primarily in Louisiana, to some degree in Mississippi. There were allegations that he had influence even in Texas. And by traditional rackets, rackets like organized prostitution, illegal gambling, loan sharking, and things of that nature.
He was involved in so many businesses, in gambling and running restaurants, in oil. He ran a vast conglomerate, maybe of 50 different businesses, all under his umbrella.
In his investigations, Aaron Cohn learned that all trails led to the Marcello organization. Marcello seemed to have both the New Orleans and Jefferson Parish police departments and municipal administrations in his pocket. Cohn also discovered that Marcello could be connected to at least 3 murders, none of which Marcello was ever charged with. In 1959, Cohn was able to bring his findings to the attention of the McClellan Committee and his chief counsel, Robert Kennedy. The committee was already waging war against the Mafia in New York and Chicago.
The top mobsters of Louisiana maintain contact with and join in common objectives with their counterparts elsewhere. Freely and expensively, they move around the country and are visited in turn. For years, unlike their Mafia predecessors, the Marcello mob has found little need to fight against officials charged with exercising police powers. The Carlos Marcellos of today do not battle the long arm of the law, for they find that they last longer, grow richer, and look more respectable by linking arms with willing officers of the law.
Through Robert Kennedy's efforts in the Justice Department, our organized crime and racketeering section really was established. That was a Robert Kennedy brainchild, to concentrate a group of prosecutors who were specially trained to engage in traditional organized crime investigations.
Marcello and other mobsters who appeared before the committee refused to acknowledge the existence of the Mafia. Even FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover seemed to concur. Hoover had long maintained that the Mafia was a myth. In 1957, however, 60 Mafia leaders were rounded up at a house in upstate New York. This seemed to confirm once and for all the existence of a national crime syndicate. Absent from this meeting, though, was Carlos Marcello.
He had such special privileges within the Mafia that he didn't have to attend any of those big conclaves. You know, that there was one at Appalachian where the heads of all the families gathered. That was broken up by the police, but Marcello wouldn't have to attend those.
Whatever the reason for Marcello's absence, he was still subpoenaed to appear before the McClellan Committee. Marcello defiantly pleaded the Fifth Amendment to 66 questions that Robert Kennedy directed toward him. His arrogance and contempt for the proceedings provided even more incentive for Robert Kennedy to attack the Mafia. Marcello even refused to answer the question of where he was born. This very withholding of information became the weapon that Robert Kennedy would use to go after Marcello. Kennedy learned that Marcello had obtained an illegal Guatemalan birth certificate and an entry described him as a citizen of Guatemala. Kennedy turned to the one agency Marcello did not have his hands in, the Immigration and Naturalization Service. He ordered the INS to expel Marcello from the United States without delay. And on April 14, 1961, Marcello made a routine check-in with immigration. He was told to sit down. The immigration agent then read a letter to Marcello.
Carlos Marcello, it has come to the attention of this office that your place of birth is listed as the country of Guatemala, and as such you are officially a citizen of that country. You are herewith ordered returned to your country of origin immediately.
What is this all about here?
You are overdue on your visa.
Why are you doing this to me? What's happening over here?
Marcello was taken to a waiting car and whisked to the airport and flown to Guatemala City. The legality of the deportation has always been in question.
I reviewed all the INS files on that case. And let me say this. I'm not certain at all that fundamental notions of due process were followed in connection with that arrest. He got no hearing. He got no opportunity to consult counsel. As I understand it, his counsel were not able to consult anybody connected with the Justice Department. This guy was just swept up, taken in a car, put on an airplane, and flown out of the country.
Marcello spent 2 agonizing months in exile. After making his way through the rugged Central American jungle, Marcello somehow got back to Louisiana. How exactly Marcello was able to re-enter the U.S. is uncertain. Investigator Ed Becker believes Marcello used his connections to sneak back into the country.
New Orleans fishing boats were down there for the crab and all that, you know, which they did periodically, like once a week at least. What did he have to do? Make one phone call. He says, I want a boat here tomorrow at 8 p.m. and give it to Joe and whoever, you know, somebody he trusted. That's it. And he couldn't take like an airplane back or drive back to get stopped at the border or, you know, driving and the flight. He naturally wouldn't do that. As you remember, there's always guards, always FBI at the airport. LA and New Orleans always photographed the mob when they came off the planes.
The government-backed deportation effort seemed to have backfired.
The fact that he sneaked back in made him even more of a hero to the mob than he was before he was deported. So, well, everybody knew he was really the godfather of the United States.
For Marcello, the deportation episode was something he wasn't going to forget. His fury toward Kennedy reportedly became an obsession. Kennedy also was enraged on hearing that Marcello was able to re-enter the country. He acted quickly and had Marcello indicted for illegal entry. The INS ruled Marcello was an undesirable alien and once again ordered him deported, a ruling that Marcello's attorneys appealed.
They never stopped trying. Washington, D.C. never stopped trying to deport Marcello. We did not get directly involved in that, other than whatever they asked us to do. But Washington really never gave up on deporting him.
Marcello never forgot the harrowing and humiliating experience of his forced deportation at the hands of Robert Kennedy. In the early 1960s, Carlos Marcello was facing the severest challenge to his empire yet in the form of the newly elected Kennedy administration. President John F. Kennedy took office and appointed his brother Robert to the post of Attorney General. Now, with greater power and authority, Robert Kennedy and the president continued their campaign to bring down Marcello. What Marcello needed was for that threat to go away. On November 22nd, 1963, that's exactly what happened. President Kennedy was visiting Dallas as part of a Democratic Party campaign tour. As a presidential motorcade made its way through Dealey Plaza, gunshots suddenly rang out. The president was shot. And rushed to nearby Parkland Hospital. Within an hour, John F. Kennedy was pronounced dead. A short time later, Dallas police apprehended a young man by the name of Lee Harvey Oswald. Though quickly fingered as a president's assassin, Oswald denied involvement.
I really don't know what the situation is about. Nobody has told me anything except that I'm accused of murdering a policeman.
Before anyone could thoroughly interrogate Oswald, though, the Dallas nightclub owner by the name of Jack Ruby slipped through police barricades amidst the confusion resulting from the killing of President Kennedy and then Oswald. Numerous conspiracy theories began to emerge. The list of possible co-conspirators included the Soviets, who had recently backed down in the Cuban Missile Crisis, Cuba, still angry over the Bay of Pigs invasion, the CIA, whom Kennedy had threatened to disband, supporters of slain South Vietnamese President Diem, who held the Kennedy administration responsible for Diem's death, and of course, the Mafia, who had more than their share of gripes with the Kennedys. The government and the media began taking a closer look at the alleged assassin. Oswald often visited New Orleans, where he apparently volunteered in a pro-Castro organization called the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Oswald was seen passing out pamphlets for the group on New Orleans streets. Oswald's affiliation to this movement was one thing that led many people to speculate on Fidel Castro's involvement in the assassination. Another theory linked the assassination to a joint effort between the CIA and Mafia, who were both anti-Castro, albeit for different reasons. The CIA viewed Castro's Cuba as a satellite of the Soviet Union and a threat to national security. As for the Mafia, Castro was directly responsible for shutting down their lucrative Cuban gambling operations. After the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion, both the CIA and the Mafia blamed President Kennedy for the failure of the invasion and for Castro remaining in power. Without any concrete evidence to support any of these various theories, the controversial Warren Commission concluded that Oswald acted alone. Nearly 15 years later, however, in 1979, the House Assassinations Committee decided to reopen the investigation. New evidence surfaced to suggest the possibility that Oswald shot the president on behalf of Carlos Marcello. By the summer of 1962, Robert Kennedy had tightened his grip on the Mafia and brought new charges against Marcello. With 2 federal indictments and a standing deportation order, Marcello was living each day under a cloud of uncertainty.
No, I did not expect it. We had no indication that anything like this was going to happen.
New information revealed possible links between Oswald and Marcello. While in New Orleans, Oswald lived with his uncle, Dutz Murat, who was affiliated with members of Marcello's gambling racket. Oswald was also possibly connected to David Ferry, who was ironically a member of the violently anti-Castro Cuban Revolutionary Front, an organization heavily financed by Carlos Marcello. Around the time that Kennedy announced his trip to Dallas, Carlos Marcello and David Ferry were planning Marcello's defense in a legal case scheduled to go to trial in New Orleans in early November. In addition to meeting with Marcello at the Town & Country Motel, Ferry also allegedly met with Oswald in the French Quarter. Conspiracy theorists speculated that Marcello was looking for someone outside his organization to take care of Kennedy, and then learned of Dutz Murat's oddball nephew, Lee Harvey Oswald. A connection between Oswald's killer Jack Ruby and Carlos Marcello was also discovered. In 1946, a year before Carlos Marcello assumed power in Louisiana, the Chicago mob launched a campaign to take over the rackets in the Dallas area and gain control of the Dallas police force. Assisting in the effort was Jack Ruby. Ruby stayed on in Dallas, opening up a nightclub and acting as a middleman between the Mafia and the police department. Jack Ruby swore he shot Lee Harvey Oswald to vindicate the president. It has been proposed, however, that Marcello needed someone with access to the Dallas police to silence Oswald, and Ruby was a perfect candidate. Whether it will be ever definitively determined, if Marcello or any other mobster had anything to do with the assassination of John F. Kennedy, it is fairly safe to say that many of Carlos Marcello's worst headaches went away on November 22, 1963. Long before John Gotti became known as a Teflon Don, the head of the New Orleans Mafia was proving to be virtually immune to government enforcement efforts. Since the 1930s, Carlos Marcello had managed to dodge federal probes linking him to organized crime. When asked by reporters of his involvement with the rackets, Marcello had a standard response.
Rackets still. What was your answer to that?
Absolutely not.
How long ago did
When asked about his business ventures, Marcello had a stock answer.
Land investment and motel.
What's your opinion of all the talk about still your involvements in the rackets and you're being labeled a mafia boss or the little man of rackets in Louisiana?
Just a lot of lies and bad statement from Aaron Cohn, people like that, that's making a living out of it.
In 1966, however, the allegations became impossible to refute. Marcello was picked up by New York City police at a restaurant in Queens along with some of the biggest names in organized crime. Upon his release and arrival to New Orleans, Marcello found himself besieged by reporters and cameras. He also placed himself in more legal turmoil after an encounter with FBI agent Patrick Collins.
He returned to New Orleans. In the airport, he made one big error, a big mistake. In the airport, he spotted an FBI official, and the FBI official came up to him and said, "Hey, Carlos, we understand you guys got caught up there in La Stella restaurant." Whereupon Marcello hauled off and practically broke the FBI guy's skull, and that landed him in prison for 6 months.
Marcello and his lawyers had their own take on the incident.
He positively did not know that Mr. Pat Collins was an FBI agent, and the evidence plainly shows that Mr. Pat Collins was a very belligerent young man at that particular moment, and he is quoted Marcello as saying, "Are you looking for trouble or do you want trouble?" Instead of trying to explain himself, Mr. Pat Collins says, "I can handle trouble," in a manner to show that he wanted to fight.
A judge convicted and sentenced Marcello to 2 years. But as he had in the past, Marcello used political clout to have his sentence reduced to a mere 6 months. However powerful he was nationally, Marcello continually wielded political influence for personal gain on his own turf. In an expose about corruption in Louisiana, Life magazine looked at Marcello's outrageous exercise of power over state officials. The article claimed Marcello persuaded the Louisiana state government to spend taxpayers' money to improve his personal 6,400-acre swampland property, Churchill Farms. If fully diked and drained, the property could be worth a reputed $60 million in prime real estate. It took 4 years and over $1 million to build a levee which benefited no one in the entire state except Carlos Marcello. Since even before the days of Louisiana's notorious Senator Huey Long, corruption had been an integral part of the state's political system. Nobody understands the relationship between politics and corruption in Louisiana better than attorney John Volz, whose unwillingness to play along may have cost him 2 campaigns for sheriff and district attorney of St. Tammany Parish.
They give us no break at all. I characterize Louisiana as a place that is known for corruption. It's known for corruption, and why? Because there's so many corrupt public officials in the state. Not all of them, but a lot of them, too many of them. And, you know, it's said that people in Louisiana don't tolerate corruption, they demand it. And so they find people who do illegal things, but who are glib. They find that funny, they find it amusing. It's entertainment. Not all people are like that, not all the people. I'm not indicting, in the general sense of the word, all the citizens of the state, because there are some fine people here that don't want to see this. But there are too many politicians with their hands out.
After both the Kefauver Committee in 1951 and the McClellan hearing 10 years later, Marcello walked away with his empire and reputation intact. In 1979, though, Marcello faced a new challenge when the House Select Committee on Assassinations reopened the investigation into President Kennedy's assassination based on new evidence and new witnesses. Ed Becker, a Las Vegas casino investigator who moved in and out of mafia circles, was one of those witnesses. He had occasion to meet with Marcello in 1962 as part of a business venture. he was able to gain the mobsters' trust by dropping names.
We were drinking, and I said, boy, I'll tell you, Bobby's sure not happy anymore that you got back in the country. I said, everybody in Las Vegas is talking about it, which of course stimulated his ego. And now he's starting to mutter to me about Bobby Kennedy and the Kennedy family. And he keeps it up and keeps it up, and now I'm keep prodding him, you know, saying, well, he's not going to be in office, that much longer. I didn't know. I mean, Kennedy just had, been reelected, and Bobby was going to, I guess, go on with him. And this infuriated Carlos, just even thinking about it. And that's when he spat out this Sicilian phrase, which I had to do by memory. I mean, I don't speak Italian, so I whatever. And phonetically, I could grasp it. I have a good memory. And so I was able to call the Italian consulate one time and find out what it meant. And I found out what it meant. It meant, you cut off the tail, the head, and the tail dies. Well, that means instead of killing the President of the United States, we would have been assassinating him, which would be, the first obvious thought. That first obvious thought, kill Bobby.
In the end, the House Select Committee on Assassinations came short of indicting him. Marcello, like so many times before, had managed to avoid prosecution. In 1979, however, the wheels of justice would catch up with Marcello as the FBI launched an elaborate undercover sting operation called BriLab, an acronym for bribery and labor. The FBI was able to infiltrate Marcello's inner sanctum through the use of an informer.
One particular fellow that cooperated was a gentleman by the name of Joe Hauser. As a result of that, we began a series of electronic surveillance activities involving phone taps on Marcello's office phones. At one point, the court authorized electronic surveillance by way of a microphone in his office here in the New Orleans area. At one time, as I think I remember correctly, we even tapped his home phone.
The FBI recruited Hauser, a notorious swindler who at the time was facing a 10-count conviction charge for bribery and racketeering.
What's in it for me?
In a deal with the Justice Department, Hauser would receive a reduced sentence in exchange for turning government informer.
The strategy was to present Marcello with an opportunity to assist Hauser in obtaining state insurance contracts. And he was presented with an opportunity and he took it. Not only did he take it, but Marcello had his own ideas about how to proceed and who to approach
We do the whole damn state if necessary.
in securing these insurance contracts on state employees.
What Marcello didn't know was that their conversations were being taped by a recorder hidden in Hauser's briefcase.
Once those approaches were made, we were off to the races. And Marcello became a dominant figure in directing Hauser and undercover FBI agents who were masquerading as agents who had connections with the Prudential Life Insurance Company.
In exchange for his influential connections, Marcello would receive cash and a cut in profits from any insurance contracts he steered to Fidelity Prudential.
The FBI agents, the undercover agents, were introduced to then Commissioner of Administration, which is like second to the governor, Mr. Charles Romer, who we alleged and obviously proved that he had taken money, I think it was $25,000, to steer the state's employees' insurance business to these particular agents. And in the process, the FBI listened to his conversations for about 19 months.
In addition to the $25,000, Marcello promised Romer monthly payments of $43,000 for the life of the contracts.
I think the significance of the case is not only the prosecution and conviction of a person who is reputed to be way up in the organized crime scale in this area, but also the fact that you could see the tentacles of organized crime moving into corrupting state officials.
Marcello became concerned. There was a chance that Romer could lose his position after the Republican gubernatorial primary. He decided to hedge his bet on Romer and offer a bribe to then Democratic Lieutenant Governor James Fitzmaurice. Marcello believed Fitzmaurice could direct certain contracts his way, especially if Romer was removed from his position. Fitzmaurice took the bait and accepted Marcello's bribe for $10,000. Carlos Marcello's reign as the untouchable Godfather of Louisiana ended in August of 1980 when a grand jury found the 70-year-old Don guilty of numerous racketeering charges. Indicted alongside Marcello were Romer I. Irving Davidson, a longtime friend of Marcello's and an influential Washington lobbyist who had originally introduced Hauser to Marcello, and Vincent Marinello, a lawyer for Marcello. Davidson and Marinello were acquitted of all charges, while Romer would be found guilty and sentenced to serve a prison term. On June 1st, 1982, due to his poor health, Marcello was taken to the United States Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri, to begin serving his sentence. After Carlos Marcello's conviction, the family's influence in New Orleans political circles and the underworld declined. In 1988, Carlos's brother Sammy Marcello was indicted for money laundering, and several Marcello-owned restaurants like the Louisiane fell into bankruptcy.
Carlos Marcello died approximately 4 or 5 years ago. He was succeeded by Anthony Corolla. Anthony Corolla was involved in gambling activity, and they were meeting at a restaurant in the French Quarter in the city of New Orleans, and unbeknown to them, they were being watched and monitored by the FBI, and the FBI actually caught them plotting to take over worldwide gaming and Louisiana route operators. One of the people that came from out of town was a gentleman by the name Tanfield, who had connections to the Genovese and the Gambino family.
FBI wiretaps indicate the Gambino and Bruno Scarfo crime families were laying the groundwork for making New Orleans a major port of entry for cocaine smuggling.
In the early 90s, the FBI conducted actually a 5-year investigation that began in 1990 and ended in the result of the convictions of 20 LCN members and associates. The LCN in New Orleans, we believe, is pretty much kind of looking at an open city right now. What I mean by open city, there is not any specifically defined one family that is concentrating on establishing itself in criminal activity.
In New Orleans, a history of affiliation between organized crime and public institutions seems destined to repeat itself.
I would venture a guess there's corruption here. Yes, there's corruption in America, and I think there always will be. But law enforcement should be vigilant and continue to investigate and prosecute corruption. It's the only tool available to combat it. It will never eradicate it, never, as long as human beings continue to be human beings. But it must be done, because I think it tempers and restrains excesses. On the other hand, the government needs to operate within the law. And it should always be mindful of that.
Despite its checkered past, the future of New Orleans is looking brighter.
Over the last 4 years with the new police chief we do have here, we've seen things turn around. The quality of life in New Orleans has improved tremendously. Crime has dropped. The homicide rate has dropped tremendously. We were averaging 400, 430 murders a year. It's down probably 40%. So across the board, the quality of life is improved.
By exploiting a political system rife with corruption, and by wielding fear and bribery like precision instruments, Marcello was able to amass an empire. Only through diligence were honest law enforcement and political officials finally able to bring down the Godfather of New Orleans and his dynasty. I'm Robert Stack. Thanks for joining us.